Why does your heart still react to someone you tried so hard to move on from? Almost as if God is refusing to let the connection fade. You try to convince yourself that you are completely done, but something in you won't settle. You feel it when their name crosses your mind, when your peace changes, and when God gently brings their memory back without your permission. You sense it in the way your spirit shifts, almost like your heart knows something your mind is trying to ignore. You feel a quiet awareness that refuses to go away, no matter how much time has passed. You realize you're not imagining it, because the feeling carries weight you didn't create. You begin noticing how God speaks to you in ways you weren't paying attention to before. You feel Him reminding you of things you overlooked, moments you dismissed, and peace you didn't fully understand at the time. You notice He brings clarity when you thought the story was finished. You sense a pull that doesn't come from loneliness, but from something meaningful awakening inside you. You feel God opening your heart to the possibility that He is still working behind the scenes. You start to realize that when someone still matters, your spirit knows long before your emotions admit it. You recognize the signs in your thoughts, your prayers, and your unexpected moments of reflection. You feel God urging you to pay attention to the connection instead of forcing yourself to dismiss it. 1. You feel a pull to release old misunderstandings. He who has knowledge spares his words, and a man of understanding is of a calm spirit. You notice that holding on to old misunderstandings doesn't sit well with your spirit anymore. You begin to feel a gentle pull inside you urging you to let clarity replace assumptions. You sense that what once caused tension now feels unnecessary and heavy in ways you didn't see before. You feel conviction rise every time you replay an old moment through the lens of hurt. You realize God is pushing you toward emotional honesty instead of silent resentment. You understand that unresolved misunderstandings have shaped how you see yourself and relationships. You begin noticing how your thoughts soften when you revisit what happened with a clearer heart. You feel God lifting the fog around the situation so you can see the truth without old emotions blinding you. You recognize how fear or pride distorted your perspective in the past. You sense God calling you to handle the situation differently this time. You start to realize that peace often comes when you're willing to understand instead of defend. You feel God guiding you toward a calmer, wiser version of yourself that doesn't rush to conclusions. You sense that releasing misunderstandings doesn't excuse what happened, but frees your heart from unnecessary weight. You begin to understand that clarity brings healing no matter how long the confusion lasts. You feel something in you preparing for a more mature and honest connection with that person. 2. You feel God pulling you toward understanding instead of distance. Bear with one another, and forgive one another, if anyone has a complaint against another. Even as Christ forgave you, so you also must do. You notice that distancing yourself emotionally no longer feels like protection but avoidance. You feel God dealing with the part of you that wants to run from what still needs healing. You sense that choosing distance will only delay the peace you crave. You realize your heart isn't trying to escape, but trying to understand. You feel God softening your approach, so you can face things with maturity. You begin to see that understanding someone doesn't mean excusing everything they did. You recognize that understanding helps you see the full picture instead of reacting from a wounded place. You sense God nudging you to look deeper than the surface level of the situation. You start to understand the emotions behind their actions and your own responses. You realize that closeness requires awareness you didn't have before. You notice how your heart reacts differently when you stop running and start listening. You feel God breaking down walls that were built out of hurt rather than wisdom. You sense a new level of emotional strength forming in you, because understanding brings clarity. You realize that distance keeps you stuck, but understanding is helping you grow. You feel God showing you that maturity is choosing awareness over avoidance. 3. You sense God blocking you from fully walking away. A man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. You notice every time you try to disconnect completely, something stops you. You feel your spirit becoming unsettled when you try to shut the door forcefully. You realize God is not allowing you to walk away from something that still carries purpose. You sense that even your attempts to release the situation feel out of alignment. You understand that your heart isn't finished with what God is still shaping. You begin to see that every emotional exit you attempt leads to spiritual discomfort. You notice that God redirects your steps when your decisions are based on fear instead of faith. You recognize that walking away prematurely would interrupt something God is still working on. You feel a heaviness when you try to separate from what God is maintaining for a reason. You understand that obedience often means staying still instead of running ahead. You start to recognize that God blocks certain exits because they are connected to growth. You feel Him slowing your steps so you don't choose the wrong ending out of frustration. You realize He is protecting you from decisions tied to pain rather than purpose. You sense Him keeping the door slightly open so you can revisit things with wisdom instead of woundedness. You understand that God closes the paths that weren't meant for you and keeps you near the ones that still matter. 4. You realize their absence taught you what their presence meant. So teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. You start to notice how their absence changed the way you see the connection. You begin to understand what their presence brought into your life after you lost access to it. You recognize that distance uncovered value you once overlooked. You feel your spirit finally acknowledging what your emotions were too overwhelmed to see before. You realize that meaning becomes clearer when the noise fades. You sense that their absence revealed how deeply their presence impacted your heart. You see the lessons, peace, and growth they brought into your life. You notice that the way you grew around them wasn't accidental. You understand that certain people shift your entire emotional and spiritual direction. You feel God highlighting the difference they made in your life. You begin to recognize that absence is a teacher when presence is no longer taken for granted. You see how loneliness exposes what connection once covered. You realize you felt more supported, understood, or inspired around them than you realized at the time. You understand that God uses absence to sharpen awareness and reveal truth. You feel the weight of their significance in a new, deeper way. 5. You feel God protecting the connection even in distance. The Lord shall preserve you from all evil. He shall preserve your soul. Psalm 121 verse 7. You notice that even in silence, the connection doesn't feel destroyed. You begin to sense that God has placed a layer of protection over the bond. You realize certain misunderstandings didn't break anything the way you expected. You feel God shielding the connection from things that could have damaged it permanently. You recognize that distance doesn't always mean disconnection. You start to see how time apart has guarded both of you from deeper hurt. You sense that God is preserving what you both weren't mature enough to handle correctly yet. You understand that separation gives room for growth instead of collapse. You realize certain storms were avoided because God stepped in at the right time. You feel gratitude for the hidden protection you didn't notice before. You begin to recognize that God preserves what still has purpose. You sense that the connection didn't fade because God kept it from being destroyed. You notice that your heart still feels anchored in ways you didn't choose. You understand that protected connections survive seasons that should have ended them. You feel God reminding you that what He shields is never meaningless. When you begin to see the signs, your heart becomes clearer, and you understand that God is not confusing you. He is guiding you. You learn that when someone still matters, God will make it known in ways your spirit cannot deny. You realize you don't have to force anything, because what God is shaping will unfold in the right timing. You can rest knowing that He never lets meaningful connections fade without purpose, and He never leaves you without direction. If the content inspired you, please like, comment, and subscribe to Pure Inspirational. Be blessed.